portion of Scripture. So we'll be in Matthew 14, begin reading in verse 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch. Now, Tetrarch means a four-part rule. Four-part rule, a ruler of a fourth, because Herod the Great had 4 sons, at least 4 that are mentioned here in the Scriptures. So don't think that every time you see the word Herod, beginning in Matthew chapter 2, and way over there in the book of Acts, and 25, all those decades later, that it's the same guy, because it's not. The Herods that are mentioned are his sons. Agrippa was a Herod. King Agrippa over in Acts 25 or 26, he was a Herod. His name was Herod Agrippa. But at any point, it's Herod the Tetrarch, meaning a 4-part rule, or ruler of 1/4. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John, and bound him, and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. And John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before him, and pleased Herod, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being instructed of her mother, be careful when you get women upset. And that's not a sexist comment. The Bible brings that out several times in Scripture, in both a good way and a bad way. When the women in Acts got excited, things started happening. But this woman here got upset, and she had instructed her daughter to do something. Verse 6. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before him and pleased him, whereupon he promised her. Well, I should have started in verse 8. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John the Baptist's head in a charger. Now this is especially gruesome. See, if Brother Donnell had a hitman kill me, and I'm using Brother Donnell because he's the most unlikely person to do that, but if Brother Donnell had a hitman kill me because he had somehow finagled a big insurance policy when I die, well, that's bad. But imagine if somebody had somebody's head cut off. They said, not only do I want you to cut their head off, but I want you to bring it to me so I can see it. That's pretty gruesome. That's Braveheart stuff. I want you to bring it to me so I can look at it. All because the man of God, notice what the man of God was doing now. They didn't get mad because the man of God was giving them the gospel. The man of God was crying out against sin. See, that's kind of an aspect that we've lost in our churches to a degree today. It has always been the job of the man of God to cry out against sin. Now, we know that our primary job is to give people the gospel. But beware of those individuals who will tell you to give people the gospel and then tell you to allow people to be comfortable in their sin. Beware of that individual, because he was crying out against it. And the men of God, the prophets of God, particularly in Bible times, they also cried out against social sins. Meaning what? Meaning there were things that perverted the nation. There were habits and issues that would pervert the entire nation. And this is what John literally lost his head for. To the point that they wanted to take a gruesome, gory pleasure in. You know what's going on today? There's not much in this country. But there are people around the world today who are dying gruesome deaths, and it seems like those who do it are taking pleasure in it. They're dying gruesome deaths because they say that Christ is God. That there's one God, the Lord God Jehovah, and they're dying gruesome, bloody deaths right now. So that's what happened here. Verse 9, and the king was sorry, nevertheless for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it be given her, and he sent and beheaded John in prison. And his head, look at this now, and his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus. And when Jesus heard it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and healed their sick. We see several times in the Gospels the phrase that Christ was moved with compassion. I wonder sometimes, what moves us to do what we do? Let's let Brother Ron get the mic. And I mean, what are some good motivations that could move us to do what? Here's the question: what are some good motivations that could move us to do what we do, but yet we would still miss compassion? What are some good principled motivations that could move us to do what we do, but we would still miss compassion? Anybody got a comment? Brother Donnell? See, a lot of people, as Brother Ron gives Brother Donnell the mic, a lot of people are moved by a good thing, such as, I have to get this, I have to get this, I have to accomplish this agenda. And it's a right agenda. It's a biblical agenda. I have to accomplish this agenda, but we forget to allow compassion to be the driving force. Brother Donnell?
I think I can conceive of people practicing what we call the golden rule, even apart from compassion.
Sure. Sure, you can practice the golden rule to make yourself feel good. You can do the right thing for the wrong reason. See, a lot of times we put the program before the people. We got a program here, Brother Doug. It's based on Scripture. It's right. It'll help the community. It'll help the church. But we put the program before the people. I think sometimes we fall into that. We fall into that mistake. Brother Doug, bring the mic up here to Brother Doug. Brother Ron, please, sir.
People with authority oftentimes have no compassion, and preachers are guilty of that. I've seen that. Probably been guilty of it.
Yes, sir. See, Christ had all this power at his disposal. He was God in the flesh. God was made flesh, John 1:14, and dwelt among us. That means he lived among us. He related to us. He interacted with us. He was not some unreachable force. He interacted with us. But despite that, he had all this power at his disposal, and he could see. Talk about seeing the big picture, like we said last week. He could see it all. But what drove him was compassion. See, when you put your program, I don't care how spiritual your program is, when you put your program before people, you know what people are going to do? They're going to leave. That's what they're going to do. And by the way, they might leave while they're sitting in the pew. They might leave while they're sitting in the pew. But a lot of times we get caught in a trap because we know that the program that we've set up is right. It's biblical. It's beneficial to the people. It's beneficial to the people, but we forget the people in the process. Brother Todd?
I think also when dealing with our children, like with disciplining them, or we know that's right to do, but if you're not careful, it can become something that's for your benefit rather than theirs. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, do you know a verse that a lot of parents know? Beat him with the rod, he shall not die. A lot of parents know that verse. Do you know a verse that a lot of children who are brought up in church, you know what verse they know? Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. You see how that works? Listen, Brother Mac would get up and preach on that verse once in a while, and he would say, I have no idea what that verse means, and I'd want to raise my hand. I know what it means. Now, I'm not saying my dad was a bad guy. I'm not saying that at all. But I'll tell you this. When you set up rules for people, that you're not following yourself, you're going to provoke people to wrath. Or when you set up rules for people that they simply can't follow, that they just can't do it. It's too difficult. It's nothing but a weight on them. It's nothing but a burden on them. You're going to provoke them to wrath. Jesus here was moved with compassion. And by the way, compassion is not letting people do whatever they want to do. Do you know who one of the most compassionate, Brother Doug and I were talking the other night, do you know who one of the most compassionate men I've ever known is Ronnie Doss. And Ronnie Doss is hard. I mean hard. But you know, I was a loudmouth, rebellious punk when I was a teenager. No two ways about it. You cannot, listen, and I'm not bragging, I'm ashamed of it, but you cannot overemphasize my level of rebellion and stupidity at 15, 16 years old. You can't exaggerate it. But do you know that those of us who were the problem children, we never felt anger against Brother Ronnie, despite all the stuff he did to us, because he did some rough stuff. Listen, he did some rough, but we never felt anger against Brother Ronnie. You know why? Because we knew he was for real, and we knew he loved us. People will let you by with a lot when they know you love them. They'll let you by with a whole lot. But if they don't know you love them, they won't do much for you. They might for a little while out of intimidation. But intimidation is like rocket fuel. It burns out real quick. It burns out really quickly. Brother Donnell, you had your hand up.
Well, I was just going to add a detail or two to things that provoke children to wrath. Inconsistent application of those rules you're talking about is another way to do it. So the border, the boundary is always moving.
Yeah.
And then another is favoritism in the application of those rules. Multiple children, different ones. Well, we see scriptural examples of that, of Joseph and how those things went as a result of that kind of thing. So
you got a set of rules on Monday, and you come in on Tuesday. To come in on Tuesday, you got a whole new set of rules. A whole new set of rules. And so, like Brother Donnell said, the line keeps moving. Listen, I joke with my boys that Coley was special. But the other day I had to whip her, which I don't do that often. I generally let her mama deal with it. But I had to whip her, and it was significant. And my boys just couldn't believe that I whipped her. That was Johnny. Anytime Carson or Coley gets a whipping, Johnny gets upset. Johnny come in there, he had big tears in his eyes. He said, "Daddy, you shouldn't have done that." He said, "She's a baby." I said, "Son, she's got to learn, she's got to follow the rules like everybody else. But if I want my kids to follow the rules need to be pretty plain. They need to be pretty direct. They need to be unmissable. They don't need to be changing once a week. But Jesus here was moved with compassion. And notice that there's always action connected to compassion. You got a bunch of younger men today. I guess I'm older now. I'll be 43 here in June. So you got a bunch of younger men today who want to get married, want to be in love, then they want to play video games all day. Now, I'm not against video games, and I don't play them. I don't have any use for them, but I got other stuff I do to waste my time, so I'm not calling out video games. All these people that want to talk about how they want to imply how they're so spiritual because they don't watch football, I wonder what they do to waste their time. But you got kids today, young men that want to talk about how much they love their wife, but they don't want to do anything. Their action is connected to compassion. So what did he do? He healed the sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, "This is a desert place, and the time is now past." In other words, it's getting late. It's getting late. Send the multitude away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. Now, why would they suggest such a thing? They had just gotten back, if you read Matthew 10, I believe it's Matthew 10, they had just gotten back from performing all these miracles. Christ gave them the ability to perform miracles and raise the dead and heal the sick, including Judas, by the way. Including Judas. Why do you suppose that they didn't think of themselves, well, let's just make them something to eat? That's what Jesus is going to do here in a minute. See, can we maintain our focus when we get tired, when we get weary? Can we remember to be just as amicable and just as kind-hearted and just as forward-thinking as far as thinking ahead and looking out for people when we get tired? See, the book of 2 Timothy 4 says, be instant, preach the word in season. That's it. For me, that's Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Well, 9:45. That's Sunday morning at 9:45. That's in season. That's a scheduled time that I'm supposed to preach. But what about it 9:45 at night on a Tuesday when I'd rather be doing something else? See, the disciples, and listen, I don't mean to impugn the apostles here at all, the disciples at all. I don't mean to do that. Listen, their names will be on the 12 foundations of the New Jerusalem for all eternity. So obviously they outrank me. But there was a learning curve here. There was a learning curve. Their solution was tell these people to go home so we can because see that if you read the book of Mark, if you read this account in the book of Mark, by the way, this account of the feeding of the 5,000 is in all four Gospels, and anything that's in all four Gospels you need to pay extra close attention to. But in the book of Mark, it says that they had just gotten back and they wanted to spend some time with Jesus, and Jesus wanted to spend some time with them, but what did he do? He set aside his agenda. He set aside what he wanted to do for the people. But their solution was, but notice what Jesus said in verse 16. But Jesus said unto them, they need not depart. Give ye them to eat. He said, give them something to eat. And they said unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, I'm not a math guy, as I've said many times. But you can't feed 5,000 people. 5,000 men, besides women and children. You can't feed 5,000 men with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Listen, I can eat 3 or 4 pounds of fish by myself. Because when I know there's a fish fry coming, I don't eat the day before. I make sure that I'm ready to go because I love to eat fish. All these people talk about steak. I love steak. But it's hard to beat fish when it's made right. A real high quality fish. But you can't feed 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. But I tell you what, it's about to happen. It's about to happen. He said, bring them hither to me. He knew what to do. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude, and they did all eat and were filled. Every once in a while, I'll randomly invite somebody to eat with us. And the other night I did it. I didn't know how much food there was. And the people that we invited, I'm not going to call their names, the people that we invited, I said, well, they got to have enough to eat. And she said, what am I supposed to do? I said, it don't matter what these kids eat. Just pull something out of the fridge. Listen, now I'm going to eat what I want to eat. But it doesn't matter what these kids eat. Just pull something out of the fridge. So she got some leftovers out and heated them up. But they didn't have that problem here. They ate. Now, the people that ate with us the other night, I don't know if they got filled up or not. They said they didn't want any more. They might have just been being polite. She said, honey, you might want to ask me how much food there is before you start inviting people. I said, no, it'll be all right. I said, it'll be fine. And I said, just take my food and put it back, put it on their plate. Because, she was making plates. She said, but there ended up being enough. But my point is, that wasn't the problem here. They ate and they were filled, but that's not all of it. They ate and they were filled. Now look at this. They all did eat and were filled and took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. 12 baskets full. And notice how this account is. Notice how the Lord inspired this account right here. There aren't any lightning bolts. There aren't any angelic hosts. They just kept. Can you imagine, Brother Donnell? He handed it to his disciples. Now I don't know if all of a sudden a big pile of fish appeared on the plate and it just kept reappearing when it would run out. I don't know. But what if it was like this? What if he handed them the food and it was just 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but they just kept breaking it and just kept breaking it and just kept breaking it, and every time they went back they kept breaking it and kept pulling it off and kept breaking it, kind of like the widow with the oil. Every time she went in there, it was enough for that day, and she kept going in there and kept going in there and kept going in there, and it never ran out. But I bet it was something, and we don't know how big the portion was, but if it was near the bottom, for the first couple of days, for the first couple of weeks, she'd dip it out and she would fill that, she would hear that container scratch the bottom of that barrel. And she'd wonder about it. She'd say, now he told me it wouldn't run out. But after a while, I bet you she quit wondering about it, Brother Doug. I bet you she did. I bet you she quit wondering about, well, maybe this was the case. Now, you'll have to bear with me. I'm a writer, so I can just see this stuff in my head. I don't know if this is the way it happened or not. Listen, it could have been a pile of fish so big that it took all of them to carry it. I don't know. Doesn't say here. It doesn't give the specific details. But it could have been a situation where they just kept breaking it. And they kept pulling off a piece of bread and kept pulling until these people who, it was probably hard for them to find something to eat. Until these people got second helpings and third helpings and fourth helpings, some of them. I don't know how many helpings they got, but I know this, they ate till they were full. And it takes a lot of fish for me to eat till I'm full. Because I don't eat any sides. I don't care anything about sides. I mean, you have to have some for other people. Renita, we'll get some fish, some red fish or some mackerel or something. She'll say, what do I make for sides? I don't care. Care what you make for sides. Make something for y'all, but there better be plenty of fish though. But they ate until they were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full. Notice this. Now notice what you got. See, the chapter started out with some pretty rough things. Listen, in the midst of all this, listen, trials are all around them. John the Baptist has been killed for doing right. It recounted that account right here. So trouble's all around them. Trials are all around them. But with trials and tribulations and discouraging things all around them, they get to see this kind of victory right here. They get to enjoy not just a meal with the Lord, but a miraculous meal with the Lord. Listen, right now there's trials going on around us. See, don't make the mistake of thinking that because the fellow that we voted for won, we don't have any more problems. That's a trap. There are trials and dangers and tribulations all around us. But in spite of all these trials and tribulations, they enjoyed the victory of this kind of meal. Now notice what happened. And they all did eat and were filled, and they took up fragments and remained 12 baskets full, and they had eaten. And they that had eaten were above 5,000 men beside women and children. And straightway, verse 22. Straightway, I assume, means right after. Right after. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him to the other side. Word constrained. Now, a lot of these fellows were fishermen, so they could have looked at the sky. We don't know this. Again, we don't know. But they could have looked at the sky because they had ways of telling when it was going to storm. They could have said, Jesus, this little boat ride isn't a good idea. At any rate, the Bible says he constrained them. Now notice this now. They all got in the boat. They were willing at his word to all get in the boat. They were willing to get in the boat, and he told them they were going to go to the other side. And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up to a mountain apart to pray. Wonder what he was praying for. Miss Kelly? Give the mic to Miss Kelly, Brother Ron.
Okay, it says he went into a mountain apart to pray. He got away from everything and everybody else so he could talk to the Lord. Up in verse 13 it says the same thing. He left the ship and went to a desert place apart so he could talk to the Lord. I did a little devotion for our ladies one time about what do we do when troubles come and we just really get, worried about things. Do we fall apart? Or do we come apart and talk to the Lord about it? Because he's the one that really handles things for us.
Do we go apart to pray? Or do we fall apart? Miss Kelly, when I preach the message on that, I'm going to give you the credit for it. But do you think maybe he was praying for them? You think maybe, the Hebrews 8 says that the Spirit, when we don't know what to pray for, the Spirit prays for us. You think he was praying for them? And when the evening was come, he was there alone, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea. Deep waters. I don't like water. I hate water worse than I hate snakes, and I hate snakes. Of course, I've never been bitten by a snake, but I have almost drowned. Now, you would think that someone with no legs and one good arm would say, I don't need to get in the water. That would be a logical conclusion. But for the first portion of my young adult life, I loved getting in swimming pools and stuff, but I don't do it anymore. I don't have time to tell you why now. I don't have time to tell you why. But they're in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. See, in the first part of the chapter, all the storms was just around them. It was around them. A close associate of theirs. It was the dangers and the storms and the trials were swirling around them. But eventually, if you live long enough, you're going to be right in the middle of it. It's not going to be somebody else. It's going to be you. It's not going to be a preacher friend of yours. It's going to be you. They were in the midst of the sea, and when the fourth watch of the night, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. Now picture this. Brother Joe and Brother Skip decided to go deep sea fishing, a bunch of other fellas. I will not be in attendance, by the way. But they decided to go deep sea fishing. And all of a sudden, when a storm comes out of nowhere, and they kind of already maybe thought there was going to be a storm, because remember, he had to constrain them to get into the ship in the first place. And so the storm pops up, and Brother Joe and Brother Skip are out there on the water, and all of a sudden they see Brother Todd walking to them on the water. Now, that would disturb me. Listen, you're not supposed to be able to walk on water. You're just not supposed to be able to do it. Unless it's frozen, of course. So they see Jesus walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. Now, leave it to Peter. I do not like it when people criticize Peter, because I can relate to Peter. Listen, Peter was always in trouble. Peter was always sticking his foot in his mouth, but you can't say that Peter wasn't ready to go. Peter was always ready to go and do. And by the way, look what the Lord did with him. But something in Peter understood that I'm safer with Christ out there on the water than I am in here in this boat. See, the Lord's looking for people. See, they all got in the boat. They all got in the boat. But the Lord's looking for people who are willing to get out of the boat. You know what that represents? That represents growth. Peter said, look what Peter does. He said, Lord, bid me to come. In verse 29, and he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to Jesus. People say, oh, how embarrassing it must have been for all his friends and all his contemporaries and Jesus himself to watch Peter sink. Oh, how embarrassing it must have been. Let me tell you something. Everybody on that boat saw Peter walk on the water. Yes, he sank, as you can find out in the next few verses. But Peter is the only human who ever lived, the only mortal man who ever lived to walk on the water. Something inside him said, I'm safer out there on the water with Jesus than I am in this boat. Churches and pastors and people and society and America needs people who are willing to get out of the boat. And I hate to do this to you, but we got to stop. I know it's a climactic moment, but we got to stop. This is like one of those cliffhangers. So be back next week. Be back next week. Yes, sir. I'm going to ask Brother Doug Turberville to close us in prayer.